I'm walking around the city of London in the UK at this moment. I was sort of thinking about how today I was busy thinking about potential courses and stuff I'm going to teach in the upcoming year, and I was struck by thinking about the similarities, but between many of the things that we investigate around this world, right? There's only so many differences, even though that we might have many different perspectives in different areas. The sort of fundamental theories or how we understand the world are pretty similar, and I could see some really striking similarities between many different areas that you might think are not related. Like, for example, micro level explanations about people, right? Like psychology, for example, and large international operations of corporations. They all follow basic patterns if you look at them. And part of the reason is, because of statistics and how we understand how these things relate. So we only have very simple explanations. But part of it's also human behavior and laws of physics, for example, of how we might interact with the world. The dimensionality of how we interact might be based on, the curvature of the earth, for example. And so there is some physics in terms of how we might naturally interact in the world. And so all of these things sort of create uniform understanding or uniform, I think that there is uniform theories around the world of how things actually work. And I've studied many different areas from engineering, chemistry, to organizational behavior, to innovation, like vast areas that, and if you read them, they're very much consistent in how we understand the world, right? That you might think that there's going to be these large inconsistencies across these different areas, but they are very much coherent and they make sense. And some of that is on purpose, that in order to get through the scientific process, you have to have some coherent explanation how things actually work. And if it doesn't work with one particular domain, somebody's going to raise that, right? If it doesn't make sense from a physics perspective, let's say you're trying to explain, human behavior, and maybe how much you fall in love with somebody, and if it doesn't make sense in terms of thermodynamics perspective, right? Like for example, perhaps you say that falling in love is about heat conductivity, for example. Well, somebody is going to raise that issue and say that doesn't fit within our understanding of thermodynamics. And I think it's an interesting perspective, right? Or interesting how coherent we tend to arrive upon the world. And so we can't have differences across science by the nature of how science actually works. And so as a consequence, how, the typical explanations how the world works has a lot of consistency. Internal consistency and what is called nomological net consistency, how they relate to other constructs, theoretical ideas. I think it's just a really interesting phenomenon how that happens. Anyways, it's just an interesting insight as I was thinking about human behavior, the number of different ideas and thoughts that I have from different areas, they all tend to converge often, um, because that's all we know, right? So, for example, to give you an example, if you think of computers, for example, computers, you might think of them as like hard science, but computing and how it works is actually modeled after human behavior and how humans actually think. And then after that, now the sort of state of the art is modeling humans after computers, right? So it's an interesting phenomenon how that happens, and that's pretty consistent across the board. So, and even, explanations of heat transfer, for example, I see those explanations pop up in terms of how it works in other areas, right? Because there's only so many equations that we can draw upon. And you might think of, for example, information transfer is borrowed heavily in sort of information theory. If you look at some of the equations, they borrow heavily from sort of heat transfer ideas and thermodynamics. So it's just a really interesting phenomenon that happens, partly related to mathematics and statistics, but also partly related to the constraints of the world. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.